Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Bull Take Scouting Podcast. The 2022 NFL Draft is just 10 days away, Alex. This is really getting into the most exciting stretch of the year.
Yeah, I mean it's awesome. I just don't like not really having a clear idea of who's going first. It's weird to me.
It's unsettling and exciting at the same time. I almost have two sides of me where at the same time, I really want to nail my mock. Last year we did great. You had 12 picks right. I had 10. And we want to repeat that success, but at the same time, if we don't, that means that it's a really exciting draft night and we don't know how it goes. We get some surprises, and that's always fun too.
Yeah, I mean, what's more exciting? Like I had the first 7 picks right, so that was really exciting. But it's also really exciting when Clellan Ferrell's picked fourth.
Oh, absolutely. Clellan Ferrell fourth, Daniel Jones sixth. That draft was definitely interesting.
Definitely. All right, let's hop into our defensive positional rankings. We'll start off with our defensive ends and our edge rushers. I mean, Aiden Hutchinson at 1. I don't think there's too much to say there. I mean, we had him 2 for a while, but just going through his tape again, maybe some character concerns with Kayvon Thibodeaux a little bit. Just I do think Hutchinson's probably the best player in this draft.
I agree. Hutchinson he's the safe pick. You're going to get a really good pro at a premium position. So it makes sense to value him as highly as we do and as highly as NFL teams do. Now at number 2, I have Kayvon Thibodeaux, and now he is such a difficult evaluation. I actually have him as my 3rd overall player right now, and you have him in your top 3 as well. And the reason for that is kind of twofold. First of all, there's the whole narrative that he took plays off. The effort wasn't there. But when I go back and watch the tape, I don't see it. I quite frankly don't see Kayvon Thibodeaux taking plays off. I do see the effort, and I'm really enticed by the traits he shows. He's got great power, great length, great bend, great explosiveness. He has all the premier traits to turn into a Pro Bowl level defensive end. Now, I am a little concerned by some of the stuff we've heard because reliable sources have said that he's not as committed to football as to being great as Aiden Hutchinson is. He might be worried a little too much about his brand, but at the end of the day, I think he still plays really, really well on the football field. So I think that it might just be the difference of, is he going to be really good in the NFL or is he going to be special? And so I'm willing to bank on, 1, my gut with how much I like him as a player, how much I like his traits, and 2, the fact that I think that in the midst of all this, the ceiling is not as low as people are maybe making it out to be.
No,
I meant the floor, not the ceiling.
Oh, I agree. I think he'll turn into a 10 sack guy in the NFL or 10 plus sack guy in the NFL. I do think Jadeveon Clowney is an interesting comp.
Mm-hmm.
I think they have similar skill sets, and they had some similar concerns coming out. I know Clowney a little bit. It was like, it seemed like in 2012, it seemed like he knew he was going to be the first pick, so he kind of just went through the motions. And I mean, you see how his career's been playing out. He's been a good player, but he hasn't really lived up to that first overall pick. So I think that there's Kayvon Thibodeaux might be in a similar situation. Let's move on to our 3rd edge rusher now, a guy that you've been high on for a very long time, since January, and that's Jermaine Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really happy with how his draft stock has evolved because I gave him a top 10 grade in January and announced it when he was really a fringe first rounder. I don't think he was a fringe first rounder in the NFL. I think the media just hadn't caught up to where his draft stock was yet. Now he's a likely top 10 pick, and I think he deserves to be. He's really well-rounded. And right behind him, I have another player who I'm really high on too, and especially compared to consensus, and that's George Karloftis, who he might be a touch tight at the top of his rush, which limits his finishing ability. You might not see 10-plus sacks every year from him, but with his power, his technique, and his still above-average athleticism, he is constantly generating pressure on the quarterback, and that's so valuable.
Yeah, he was a guy that I liked in the summer after watching his tape before the season started, and I think his tape was, just what I expected it to be. Like you said, he may not be a 10-plus sack guy every single season, but he's still a great player. He creates a ton of pressures just because of how powerful he is. He can drive those offensive tackles right back into the quarterback or into the running back. He's going to impact you both in the passing game and the run game. I think he's another guy that I think has a pretty high floor. And
For sure.
he might not have, a Hall of Fame potential, but I think, I wouldn't be shocked to see him make, a all pro team once or twice in his career.
Yeah, I totally agree. And now I think it's time to address the elephant in the room here. Trevon Walker is reportedly in consideration for the first overall pick for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And we talked about it before, but we've got to recap it here too. I just don't see it. I think that he's going to be a good NFL player. He certainly has some enticing traits with his especially relative athleticism to his size, his length. He's got 35-inch arms. He often gets right into the offensive lineman's chest, but I just don't see enough of pass rush ability and even pass rush potential because while I think that the speed to power is really interesting and he could definitely get a lot of pocket push consistently, and if he gets the technique, he can disengage and get to the quarterback. I just don't really think he can ever really bend around the edge. His athletic testing is through the roof, but I on tape I don't see him bending around the edge. He's not almost a little bit of a tweener in that he just doesn't have that side of his profile, but at the same time you're not really going to move him full time to D tackle either.
Yeah, I think Walker was a player that I liked when we first went through the scouting process. I thought, I had him as a late first round pick, and I thought he would be a really solid NFL player. But I mean, just how things can change when he
Yeah.
becomes in the conversation for, a top three or even first overall pick. Now he's the guy that I don't like anymore because he's projected to go much higher than I value him at. But like you said, I just the athletic traits are great, but he doesn't produce. And I saw some more concerning stats. It might have been on Twitter, where it was like he had like a 49% of his pressures were like what they called like cleanup pressures, where it was like, it was kind of giving the pressure to the closest guy, or the ball was in the quarterback's hands for like 4 or 5 seconds, like much longer than it would be in the NFL. So that obviously stats, you can only do so much with them, but it was just another thing to me to be like, well, again, even his production that he has maybe isn't production you would get on every team. He was on the best defense in college football.
And for the people who love the athletic testing, the one number that wasn't that good was a 10-yard split, and that's arguably the most important testing number for defensive ends.
Yeah, and I mean, we only have about 30 minutes on this podcast. We've talked about defensive ends a lot. Any other defensive ends that you want to bring up before we move on to the next position?
Yeah, I feel like we got to talk about David Ajabo because he's right there with the guys that we've mentioned. Just because he tore his ACL for me doesn't mean he's not deserving of a pick in the first round. I think you have to have the right situation. It might not be best for a team that really needs to spend that late first round pick on a player who can give them the chance to win a Super Bowl, quite frankly. But let's say you're the Detroit Lions, and they're very likely going to go edge. But if the board were to follow what my big board's going to look like, and Hutchinson goes 1, I would be picking Ahmad Gardner if I was the Detroit Lions. He's going to be my number 2 player on my board. Then at 32, man, David Ajabo is so interesting because you look at this 5 years down the line. You forget about the missed time to his Achilles tear. If he develops into the player he can with his really great burst and bend off the edge, and you've got a duo that can really be the centerpieces of your defense for the next 10 years. And boy, does Detroit need that.
Yeah, I mean that'd be huge to have, David Ajabo there. Like you said, his rookie year, yeah, he's probably going to miss it because of his Achilles, miss the entire thing. But you're not drafting a rookie just for their first year. You're drafting them for, the next 5 to 10 years. And oftentimes the rookie year is the worst year for players entering the league anyways. Though the one little caveat that I'll say with Ajabo is he's still a really raw prospect in my opinion, and missing that rookie year could potentially hurt his development. It might just, bump him back a year in his development. But I mean, he's a really good player too, and obviously his grade dropped for me because of that Achilles tear. If he didn't have that injury, he would not have the 2.0.
Yeah, I think you can throw up Walt's comment over here. He's shouting out Arnold Ebiketie, who I think is really the next guy after this top tier. I think Ebiketie could end up sliding into round 1, and he's just a really well-rounded player who's definitely going to be a good value come probably opening night of the draft at this point. And I think now we can move on to the defensive tackles. And I think this is a good defensive tackle class, and it was a little hard to sort at the top. I didn't love Jordan Davis throughout the process, but the more I thought about it, the more I convinced myself that he's earned a first round selection with what he's done in this pre-draft process. I think showing up to the NFL Combine, having lost weight, looking incredibly explosive, shows that while he was primarily a run stuffer on film, there is significant pass rush potential. And with how much space he's going to take up, how he's going to be able to get off blocks and tackle the running back in the hole immediately, if you can get really any kind of pass rush, you're returning first round value there.
Yeah, and you mentioned that it was hard to sort out at the top, and I mean, look at both of our grades, really close between all the players. It was hard to sort out at the top, but somehow we have basically identical positional rankings. And there were a couple guys where it was like I was stuck between the two of them, and it just not. I don't want to say a flip of the coin, but it was really close call, and there were a couple of those, especially in the defensive tackle class, and that's just how it turned out, which is really weird. And
We don't even like share these rankings
no,
ahead of time. We really
I
don't.
hadn't seen your rankings until you sent
No.
them to me to make the graphic, and
Yeah.
I was like,
And it consistently happens. I think it's because with years of doing this together, we learn to just watch out for the same things, value the same traits, and without even talking to each other, we end up with such similar rankings. But who really do you think has the potential to outdo their draft position in the next few guys after Jordan Davis?
I think DeMarvin Leal is a guy that might be getting hated on a little bit, and yeah, he was a guy that I was at least pretty high on coming into the season. I had expect him to go in the first round, and I think I have a high mid to high second on him, and I think his name has been thrown around between date or the middle of round 2 to round 3, and I think if he goes in round 3, he could be a steal. Yeah, he's a little bit of a tweener, but I think he's a really good player, and sometimes like if you can play, you can play. And I think that tweener label is kind of hurting him. You see, sometimes it benefits people. Maybe Travon Walker might benefit from that, but it seems like Leal, that's kind of hurting him in the draft process. I know he didn't have a great pro day at Texas A&M, but I think he's a really good player that could provide a lot of positional versatility. And if he goes on towards the beginning of round 3, I think he could be a really good steal.
Yeah, I do think that you have to have a plan for him. Are you going to have him bulk up and play inside, or are you going to have him drop some weight again and play on the outside? But either way, he's got good
I think he could
traits.
do both.
Yeah, I agree. I think you just got to commit to one, or else maybe you never want to have a jack of all trades, master of none type in the NFL. You got to get a guy into a position, get him working there. I really like Logan Hall from Houston. I think he's got so much pass rush ability with the quickness, even the burst upfield immediately, and some really good pass rush moves too. And I want to address how we have Devontae Wyatt pretty low compared to other people. And sometimes it doesn't become widely spread, but there's incidents in players' past that filter, and the big guys in the media aren't always going to talk about it. They're going to protect players of draft stock, not talk too negatively about anyone. But we did hear that Devontae Wyatt has 4 domestic violence incidents in his past, and we factored that into his evaluation a little bit. So that's why he's down there.
Yeah, he would have been either my second or third defensive tackle probably without those, but I think 4 is a concern, and you definitely have to factor that in. I want to give our guy Travis Jones a shout out from UConn.
Yeah,
that's where both of us are going to school right now, and I'd say that we probably are a little bit lower on him than consensus all of a sudden. I think a lot of draft scouts have put him high second, end of the first round, and to me, I think his Senior Bowl tape was, to me, outstanding. It was so much fun to watch, but his game tape was not on the same level as his Senior Bowl tape, and I think you have to take that into consideration.
Yeah, part of it was that he faced a lot of double teams, but I really didn't like where he is in the run game right now. Just really lacked awareness. That didn't really understand his run fits well. So I don't think he's a day one starter. But as you alluded to, the potential's through the roof, and you could argue nobody has helped themselves more than Travis Jones in this pre-draft process with how he played at the Senior Bowl.
Totally, I think he might have been a round 3 pick, possibly the beginning of day 3, and I mean his name is strongly in the end of round one, top of round two conversation.
I think we can move on to cornerbacks now. And I absolutely love the top corner on this board. I already talked about it. Ahmad Gardner has really all the traits you look for in a cornerback. He's completely clean in terms of character off the field. And that Alabama tape was really the cherry on top. The first time I scouted him in December, didn't obviously I hadn't watched the tape yet. The game hadn't happened. And the question was, he hasn't really faced any top end NFL talent. Well, I mean, he completely shuts down whoever lines up across from him against Alabama in the college football playoff.
Yeah, his season was outstanding, and if we're being honest, his career was outstanding. To take over 1,000 coverage snaps and not allow a touchdown at all,
yeah,
I mean that's just insane. And then we talk about his length, his ability to make up ground if he loses it initially, his physicality. I love his ability in the run game. You don't see that from cornerbacks, let alone a cornerback that's tall, lanky, doesn't have the most size. You mentioned that Alabama tape. I mean, there were multiple times where he looked like the best player on the field for Cincinnati easily, and at times between Cincinnati and Alabama.
I think he was the best player on that field for both teams. Even with how star-studded Alabama is, I think he truly was the best player on that field. And now there's another guy in this cornerback class who might have been the best player in the nation and definitely at his position in 2019, and that's Derek Stingley. But since then, we saw his play didn't drop nearly as much as people say. I think he was still good and certainly in coverage in 2020 and then in a couple games in 2021. But the reason I have Trent Mcduffie against Derek Stingley is because I think Mcduffie is just so much safer of a prospect. I know this could absolutely burn me, and Derek Stingley could be a first team All-Pro for years to come because that's how special he is in terms of traits. But there are two things I'm concerned with. One is the health. He played throughout injuries, missed a few games in 2020, had a different injury to his foot this past summer in 2021, re-aggravated it a couple games into the season and had to shut it down. So the fact that he went 2 full seasons without being fully healthy, it just makes me question his durability. And then what I didn't like was his disinterest at times in the run game. I thought that was really concerning. That does not fly in the NFL, and it's really something he's going to have to fix. And meanwhile, Trent Mcduffie, he might not be as big, might not be as long. He's got all the athletic traits you need to shine in man coverage. And we hear that he has absolutely nailed his interviews, and you can tell on tape that he's really smart, technically refined. He's tenacious in run support. I know I can't miss with Trent Mcduffie, and that's why I've got him a little ahead of Stingley. But I see that you do have Stingley at number 2. So was it really just the extent to which his upside is special that you kept Stingley at number 2?
Yeah, totally. It's the upside potential, and we know McDuffie's not the biggest guy. I think he might struggle a little bit versus super tall wide receivers. So yeah, just that. But I think they're both really good players.
Yeah. After that, I thought it was really difficult to grade and to rank these cornerbacks. They almost each have a different type of flavor. Kyler Gordon's got fantastic traits, maybe a little raw in terms of technique. Andrew Booth, you could kind of put him in that same category, just a notch lower, I think, and a little less technically refined, which is why I gave that first round grade to Gordon, and Booth is right outside round 1. And then you got Roger McCreary, who on the other hand, I think he's got fantastic technique. He's going to step in day 1 and be a quality starting cornerback in the NFL. You just worry a little bit about the arm length, the size, and whether or not against the absolute best athletes and route runners, he's going to be able to play just as well as he did in college. But that being said, I do really like McCreary too. I think he'll be a really good corner.
Yeah, I think something to note about Booth, he does have an injury concern with that. I'm pretty sure it's an abdominal hernia.
That sports hernia surgery is what he just underwent.
I'm pretty sure he had it twice. But that was one part of the reasons why I dropped him to 6 below McCreary. I did have him ahead before hearing about that, but it was just like his second surgery on it. Could it be a concern? Yeah, maybe. So then I'll just go with a guy that I think doesn't have injury concerns. But I think this kind of, I want to say second tier of cornerbacks is really good. Obviously, we have Sauce at the top, but then Stingley, McDuffie. I want to pull up something from Walter. He said Sauce has been compared to Antonio Cromartie. I'm too young to know what Cromartie looked like coming out of FSU, but I know that Cromartie was extremely athletic,
Mhm.
and I do think that's a good point. Sauce is great. He doesn't have elite athleticism, and that just could be because he's super long. You don't see super tall, super long guys have the world's greatest athleticism, but I think his ability to make up in ground and coverage, I'm not worried about his athleticism at all.
Yeah, it's definitely still very good. As a whole, this cornerback class has the potential to emerge as really one of the best in the past decade. Because we talked about the guys at the top. I mean, you could have two perennial Pro Bowlers in Gardner and Stingley, and McDuffie earning several in his career as well. We'd like the next group as a potential quality starting cornerbacks. And then there's a little group that I've got graded kind of in the third, fourth round where they're really raw, to be honest, but they've got all the traits. I mean,
Yeah,
Tariq Woolen, I didn't even know that anyone at 6'4" and as long as he can flip their hips and run a 4.26 like that. It's absolutely crazy. I think Jalen Armour Davis is raw and definitely not what you expect out of an Alabama corner, but he's got all the traits as well. Cam Taylor Britt from Nebraska kind of falls into the same category. There's some potential for a couple more guys that don't even go in the top 6, 7 cornerbacks to become quality starters in the NFL.
yeah. You mentioned Tariq Woolen. He's a guy that I find really, really intriguing.
Mhm.
He's only been playing cornerback for a couple years. He was wide receiver before that, and at 6'4", the way he can run, I think he's got really high potential. He just, he's raw. He's got to put it all together.
Yeah, you can tell that he hasn't been playing the position for too long. And now I think we can move on to the safeties, and this is a good safety group. I've heard some people say it's not, some people say it is. I'm going to side with those that say it is, and let's talk a little bit about Kyle Hamilton first because it seems like whereas everyone really loved Hamilton the whole way, you even had some people saying he was a top 3 player in the class. I was never quite that high, but now you've got people really finding ways to bash him almost and argue that he's just not worthy of a top 10 pick. And I still think he is. I know that you're not going to put him on slot receivers or running backs because he's just simply too big to be that agile in man coverage. I still think you can match him up with tight ends and he can succeed, and that's really valuable. And then against the run, I love what Hamilton brings in terms of being able to read the field, diagnose plays, click to the ball. And one thing that I want to specify with this at testing numbers is they were poor, but that what those testing numbers don't capture is how big his tackle radius is. He's so tall and so long that he doesn't need to get there as fast as other safeties do to make the play. I still think he's rangy. I still think he can make plays in the backfield against the pass and certainly against the run because he's really really tall and really really long. So I think you put him in the box. There's been talk that he's a little bit of a tweener, but no, I think he's a box safety against the run. I think he's going to shine. You match him up against tight ends, and you've got a Pro Bowl level player.
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, if he could line up in the slot and cover receivers man for man, I mean, he would have a higher grade, obviously. And that's the reason why 1.3 is right inside that top 10. And I think, like you said, really good against the run. He's got great range, even though he's not as fast as you'd probably like to see. But all this talk about him being, a mid first to late first round grade, just no, no. I,
No,
I think he's a name that he was super high going into the season. To me, he seems like one of those guys that people just try to pick apart a little bit and find all the flaws in their game and just not appreciate them for the player that they are.
that's often what it is. We've heard Kyle Hamilton's name get listed at the top of this draft class for over a year, and now that we get into April and we want to talk about some of the other flashy guys, and there are some other guys at this position I think are going to be quality starters and are really safe prospects, not quite on the level of Kyle Hamilton. But for example, Daxton Hill, his man coverage value is superior to Kyle Hamilton's, especially out of the slot. He almost pretty much played nickel at Michigan. And I think he can really shine against running backs, against shorter slot receivers. I don't love him against bigger targets. I think that bigger targets can catch over him, but he's going to have a good career operating primarily out of the slot. And then Brisker and Scene, they're really, really good against the run. And they have the athletic traits for man coverage. I just don't think they were utilized there too often. So there's definitely potential to uncover there as well against the pass.
Yeah, Scene was a safety I liked since like January when we made our podcast previewing the college football playoffs, and I saw him play. I was just extremely impressed. Obviously, like you said, he wasn't used in coverage probably to the best of his ability, but in the run game and hitting guys. I love when you have a safety that's really going to be the tone setter in the back end. I mean, he would crack guys, wide receivers coming across the middle, catching the ball. And to me, I think that's a really underrated tool to have because you don't see a lot of those guys come around. And, when they do, like I said, they could set the tone for a defense, and you don't really want to cross his path again.
No, you don't. I think that's a really good way to put it. And I really like the next guys too, honestly. I think Nick Ross from Maryland, Jalen Petrie from Baylor, and Brian Cook from Cincinnati can all be solid starters in the NFL as well. So I think we're looking at, around 7 guys who are going to be starters and definitely not starters you're looking to replace. So it's a good safety class.
Yeah, I think the defensive back class as a whole, between the cornerbacks and the safeties, I think there's a lot of talent and a lot of potential.
Yeah, the whole defensive class as a whole, honestly. I think it's superior to the offensive class and definitely superior to last year's defensive class where we saw, 2 or 3 defenders go in the top 10, and those were with picks 8, 9, and 10. That won't be the case this year. Obviously not. We're going to see defenders go 1 and 2, quite possibly 3 and 4 as well. And now let's get into our last position group here, and that's the linebackers. And man, Devin Lloyd is going to be a steal for someone, an absolute steal. If I'm a fan of any team picking the 20s, and that's at all a position of need, I'm rooting for my team to pick Devin Lloyd because I think that you've got a linebacker who truly has elite pass rushing potential. He has the length to take on blockers, the burst and bend to get around blockers at the edge. You've got a lot of linebackers who are productive as pass rushers in college, but that kind of belies a lack of NFL potential there because they're really just used as free blitzers. Lloyd, I think, can actually take on defensive ends and win in the NFL, especially if you coach up his technique. And then in the run game, he's excellent too. Yeah, I think his play diagnosis could still get better, but his range is great. His closing burst is great. And Devin Lloyd is really a guy with Pro Bowl potential, in my opinion.
Yeah, I really enjoyed watching Devin Lloyd's tape. I think he's an all-around really good linebacker. I think, like you said, his instincts a little bit, just, maybe some more experience would help him there. But I think all around, like you said, great in the run game, great as a blitzer. I think he's really solid in the pass game as well. So I think he'll be a star linebacker for whichever team picks him. And he's another guy that I think this draft is just, for whatever reason, people wanted to find all the flaws in his game and don't really want to point out his strengths. And to me, that's why it kind of seems like he's fallen a little bit. But like you said, whichever team ends up picking him towards the end of the first round is going to get a steal.
Yeah, absolutely. And now the next guy, a little different because he doesn't really have the measurables at all that Devin Lloyd does, but what a football player. Nakobi Dean, man, I mean, you put him in the middle of your defense and let him be the quarterback of that unit, calling the signals, allow him to just read, react, get to the football. That's what he does best.
Yeah, I mean, he's got great play speed, in my opinion, true sideline to sideline speed from a linebacker. And to me, the best thing about Dean was, like you said, his ability to quarterback the defense. You saw it time and time again. I mean, that's a loaded Georgia defense, and he was the leader of that defense. Everyone listened to him. He got everyone in position when he needed to, so that cannot be understated. You have, guys that were, top 10 picks and possibly Jordan Davis, now Javon Walker. You have a guy like Lewis Dean in the back end, De'Aaron Kendricks at cornerback, and Nakobi Dean was the leader of that defense. So to me, that's extremely impressive, and that's a huge trait to have for a linebacker.
Yeah, he was the leader of that defense, and he's our highest graded Georgia Bulldog, which is really interesting because there's a scenario in which Trevon Walker goes first overall and Nakobi Dean doesn't go in the first round.
Yeah. It seems like Dean's going to go the very end of the first or the start of the second. And, I mean, between Lloyd going towards the end of the first round and Dean possibly going in the second, I mean, if you need a linebacker you could get a steal with either of those guys. And let's talk
Absolutely.
about the second tier guys that I think all have really good potential: Chad Muma, Christian Harris, Quay Walker, and Troy Anderson. And I want to talk about Christian Harris because he was a guy that I was a huge fan of coming into the season, and it just kind of seemed like his play did not. It was not at the level that it was in 2020.
Yeah.
And it,
Go ahead.
it was 2020. It was disappointing to me. But then we saw him have possibly his best game of the season in the national championship game that they lost, and to me it reminded me a little bit of Christian Barmore.
Yeah.
He's got all the skills though. He's got all the talent, and I think one of the things that I love about Christian Harris, he played safety in high school.
Yeah.
He was recruited as a safety. As a true freshman, he transitioned to linebacker. So he's got all these coverage skills from playing safety. To me, he really, when he drops back into coverage, you can see it a little bit. He still has that safety mentality of he has a great ability to see guys coming in and out of his zone. So I think that's a huge talent that not all linebackers have. So I think he could be a really, really good player if he can, play the way he did in 2020.
I thought Christian Harris was going to end up in the round one conversation just as we went through this draft process, and I thought that I really just thought that was something that was going to happen. I think that I was really disappointed by his 2021 tape, honestly. I saw a lack of interest often, which is a big red flag. I gave him a little benefit of the doubt in grading him still at a 2.4, which is about a mid-second round grade, because Christian Barmore kind of showed the same thing, all the traits, but inconsistent effort, and he had quite the rookie year with New England. So coming out of the same program in the front seven too, maybe Christian Harris is kind of like that too. And I think there's a couple more guys I want to mention here. The first one being Damon Clark, who I actually had graded a full round earlier, but because of a spine injury, he's going to be missing his entire rookie year. And I think that's noteworthy because I really haven't heard anyone talk about it. Something I actually only learned when I was just looking him up, finalizing his grade, and I was like, oh wow, I did not hear about that, and that's a shame because I think he's going when he gets to hit the field in the NFL, he's going to be a quality starting linebacker. Now, the other guy that I want to talk about is Troy Anderson. I mean, I know we've mentioned him before, but it's a great way to end off this defensive rankings podcast is to talk about a guy who he epitomizes what you're taking as valuing traits over really what you've seen. He played at a lower level of competition, but Troy Anderson has. I really haven't even seen that combination of traits from a linebacker before. As great as we just talked about Devin Lloyd's traits, I think Anderson is bigger. He's even longer. He's even faster. He's even quicker. If you mold him right, you can have such a good player.
Yeah, I mean he's still really raw, and Troy Anderson is a football player. I mean, he played offense on Montana State. He made all conference as a quarterback. The next year he played running back. He did everything for them. And his traits are outstanding. I think his size is great. His speed is great. He's a player that I really, really like. He's got to go to a team. He would probably benefit the most from sitting for a year and learning. But, I mean, the fact that he played quarterback, he played running back, he played linebacker, to me that shows some sort of high football intelligence.
Oh, for sure.
So I think he can do it. I think he can put it all together. I think he just needs some time. But, I mean, we just said it about the past two positions. This could be a really good linebacker class as well.
No, absolutely. And that, we kind of said that for every position. That goes back to my point that this is a really good defensive class, and teams are going to get quality starters deep into day two.
Yeah, that's, to me, especially on the defensive side of the ball, that's where the gold mine is. Day two between, pick 33 and pick would be 105. I think that's where you're going to get a lot of quality starters with really high upside.
Yeah, totally agree. And so that wraps up our defensive rankings podcast. We'll be back on next Monday probably, and I can't wait for that podcast episode because I think we should leave it a little bit unstructured and just talk about the NFL draft. It'll be 3 days away. We'll share a lot of what we've been hearing. I know you guys have been loving our rumor mills that we've been posting every Sunday. We'll have one again on the Wednesday, the day before the draft, to get you right as you want to do your final mock draft. I appreciate the support on those, and we'll make sure to trickle in a little of that information on our podcast on Monday. Just talk about the scenarios, talk about what we think might happen 3 days later.
Yeah, we'll talk about scenarios and what we think could happen without giving away any hints to our mock draft because obviously I want to do better than you in the mock draft. So if I got a few nuggets that I haven't heard, might have to keep those to myself. But thanks for everyone for listening, and if you're watching. And be sure, if you're listening, you can check out all our rankings on our Instagram page. They'll be posted within the next 7 or 8 days. So be on the lookout for those. And we'll be back with another episode next Monday. And the NFL draft is coming up fast.